If you'd like, Mary. Okay, welcome everyone. I believe this is our fourth class, Letter to a Friend. Let's begin with the prayers. Mary will put the prayers on the screen, and Jana, you'll lead us here in the Gompa in reciting those.
To the founder,
The endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
short mandala offering. This ground,
Anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Viryatayami.
refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I
Go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodang Soki Choknam La Jang Chu Bardu Takni Kyab Suchi Daki Chunyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jang Chu Bardu Dakni Kyab Suchi Daki Chunyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Druparshu. Okay, thank you, Jana and Mary, for your help with that. Let's go ahead and do a very short meditation before we begin. Give ourselves a chance just to come into this space together with our minds a bit more focused and calm. And then we'll set our motivation together as well. So just spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, bringing your awareness to the breath and using the breath in whatever way you prefer as a meditation object, trying to keep the mind with the breath. When the mind wanders, gently bring the mind back to the breath. Do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation. So now let's set our motivation of bodhicitta. Oops. Put this on here. Maybe it goes over here. Over here is probably better. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So let's set our motivation of bodhicitta for tonight's class. And recall how the mind that we're primarily trying to overcome when we generate this motivation is the mind of self-cherishing, self-centeredness. And a lot of the teachings we're looking at in this text are focused on ourselves, focused on creating the best results for ourselves, having good rebirths, good conditions within samsara, and of course, achieving the more ultimate states, liberation from our suffering, and so on. But even when we talk about enacting our own welfare, we want to do that free of self-centeredness, recognizing that if we do have the ideal conditions, and we will benefit from that, certainly, we do that so that we can accomplish the welfare of all beings. So in this text now, we're primarily looking at good morality, how to engage in the 10 virtuous actions. But the study of this is not so that we ourselves can have those good results. It's so that we can use those good results for the benefit of others. So again, any of these sort of selfish tendencies that we might have, a desire to focus mostly on our own welfare, we want to try to set those aside and to be here with this very wide open heart, this heart that embraces the welfare of all beings, with the wish to be able to help every one of them to achieve their greatest potential. And the recognition that to do this, we have to become enlightened ourselves. As His Holiness says, this is being wisely selfish. This is actually taking care of ourselves in the best way, which is to be able to then take care of others. So again, try to create that mind that is other cherishing, that is thinking of others first, and the wish to develop ourselves so we can help others to accomplish their welfare. And this is the motivation of bodhicitta that we bring to all of these teachings, with the understanding that they are all part and parcel of getting us to the goal of being able to help all beings perfectly. You can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. So again, in this text by Nagarjuna, letter to a friend, we've been in the primary verses that pertain to kind of the general practices for both lay practitioners as well as ordained. And we're going to go into the section shortly about primarily the lay practitioners. But this is, again, a text that was written by Nagarjuna for a friend of his who was a king, and he wanted to be able to give the best advice for how to go about one's daily business. And of course, the practice of morality is really at the heart of all of Buddhism. You know, when we talk about the Buddha's teachings, we can divide them into three main baskets. The first being Vinaya, or the teachings on morality. And of course, there's extensive teachings on the morality for monks and nuns, but there's also, of course, teachings for us as lay practitioners. And that primarily revolves around avoiding the 10 non-virtues and engaging in their opposites, the 10 virtuous actions. And that's the section that we're on now. But then, of course, the other two baskets of the Buddhist teachings will touch on some of that as part of this. But for lay practitioners, this is the main practice, is essentially to watch our conduct, to try to be as meticulous and trying to avoid harming others in our daily actions as we go about our business, what have you. The other two baskets of the Sutra basket, which includes all the teachings on developing concentration. And again, is a bit of that in this text, but not quite so much. Because again, as lay practitioners, we perhaps don't have quite as much time to dedicate to the practice of developing concentration. And then the third sutra basket, or the third basket of discourses, is the Abhidharma, the wisdom teachings. And we will touch on that occasionally as well. But again, those two are much more difficult for us to practice. In fact, in this wonderful little book, which by the way, I'll mention that we do have the discount code available at Wisdom through tomorrow is what I was told. When I had Sarah and John send the information out, I didn't know for sure how long they would keep the discount code valid, but it's good through tomorrow. And again, that is capital N Nagarjuna 40. And that will get you 40% off either the hardbound edition or the e version. So but anyway, Geshe Sopa does talk in this book a bit more in the section that I read for tonight about lay practitioners and the importance of us being really dedicated to these basic practices. We're going to see that coming up even with regard to the 6 perfections, that there are certain perfections that the Buddha thought were more applicable to those leading a lay life rather than those who have more time for practice, perhaps, who are ordained and living in a monastic setting and what have you. So last time we introduced these 10 paths of non-virtue to understand their opposites, the 10 paths of virtue. And as I mentioned last week, just simply not doing these things isn't virtuous. So right now we're all not killing, we're all not stealing, we're all not engaging in sexual misconduct, we're all not lying and so on, right? But just that fact alone doesn't create virtue. We only create virtue in regard to our refraining from those sorts of activities. So when we are tempted to kill or tempted to steal, what have you, then we have the virtuous action of refraining from that. Now, as I said, if you do take the 5 lay vows, then you would gain the merit of that that virtuous action of refraining all the time because of the power of the vow. And again, that pertains to the acts of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and lying, just the first 4 of these 10 non-virtues. And the 5th one is intoxicants, avoiding alcohol, intoxicants, what have you. We're going to see that coming up very shortly as well. We'll get to that later tonight. So what we dealt with last time were the first 3 of the 10 non-virtues, and again, they're opposites, the 10 virtues that pertain to the door of the body, the ways in which we create action physically. Again, focusing primarily on the non-virtue in terms of understanding that, and then we can better understand the virtue of avoiding that. So I might just put up real quickly, and I hope it all changes here in the Gompa. Do you now have the thing that says 1, the basis or object of the action? Okay, good. So just to review real quickly, there are these 4 that are set out in this booklet based on Pabanka Rinpoche's presentation. The basis or object of the action. The intention has 3 parts in this presentation. The state of mind of the person performing the action, particularly with regard to recognition, or what in our text is called conception, meaning that we understand that that is the object that we are directing the action towards. The motive, which is the kind of motivation to do that particular action, to kill or what have you. And then the delusion, we have to have one of the delusions present. That's what makes it a non-virtuous action. Again, in our text, they divided intent into recognition and motive, and then they had the delusion separate. So it ended up being kind of 5 different branches, but these 4 branches encompass all of what Nagarjuna and Venerable Rendawa in his commentary, what they say. Then you have the actual deed, the performance of the action, the preparation, actually saying, okay, I'm going to go about killing this being through whatever means, ant spray or whatever the case might be. And then number 4, the completion of the action in the case of killing when the being actually dies. So again, these are just to remind us of what we're looking at in terms of these various negative actions, these non-virtuous actions. So let's go back to the text. We left off after the first 3 on body. We're going now into the 4 that pertain to our speech. And this is there's pretty much everything encompassed in these four in terms of non-virtue. And it is important that we are really careful with our speech, because the karma of not having good speech is that our speech loses power and loses an ability to influence others. And of course, on the bodhisattva path, it's very important that we have skillful speech. So let's look at what is said here. Let me actually make it a little bit larger for both online and in the Gompa. Okay. So the object for the act of speaking falsehoods, this is often just simply called lying, is something which has been seen, heard, discerned, or cognized, and its opposite. So again, we've seen something and we often say that we didn't, or we have heard something and we say that we didn't. It can be the opposite of these. It can be things that we are distorting in some way. It's interesting, in some of the texts, it actually says that the object is the person who you're lying to. That makes some sense, right? Because there always has to be an object in terms of some person. If we lie to ourselves in the mirror, and say, "Oh, you look beautiful today," when we're really not so beautiful looking. But beauty is only skin deep, right? So, but anyway, the idea is that we generally need somebody who's the recipient of that lie, who is the person that we're directing that falsehood towards. And in fact, in many of the texts, it says it's not just a being, it's a person who has to understand you. In other words, if you were in another country speaking lies in English or something, and the person didn't get a word of what you were saying, you technically wouldn't have that object present. But whether it's the actual words that are being spoken, the thing that you are lying about, or the person, it is some kind of direction that is going towards deceiving others, creating something that is a deception. The next line, the conception, or again, what we call the recognition, is to conceive the opposite of what was seen, heard, and so on. Again, so that we end up lying by saying we didn't see that, we didn't hear that, and so on. And again, I think that is the same in the other presentations online. The intent or the motivation is to state such a fabricated conception. We want to lie. You have to have an intention to lie in order to be lying. If you were told something that you believed to be true and you didn't know it was a lie because that information was never given to you, and you pass that on to someone else, then technically you're not lying, because you have no intention of deceiving that person. You believe that what you're telling them is actually true. The mental affliction is as before, and this is something that goes through all 10 of these. Generally, we have the 3 root afflictions of attachment or desire, hatred, anger, aversion, that kind of energy, and then the ignorance, that is a grosser form of ignorance. These 3 have many other subdivisions, or kind of peripheral afflictions that can be related to them. So it's any affliction, mental affliction, that can be present. The finalization is when another person has received a false understanding in response to their question or to whatever it is that you're talking to them about. Now, again, in some texts, in the one by the FPMT, they actually say that the person has to believe you. But it's kind of interesting in this presentation, as well as in Geshe Sopa's, he says that it's not necessary that the person believe your lie, which is kind of interesting because it makes sense, right? That you would be lying with the intention to deceive, and the person receives the words, whether they believe it or not, isn't as important as whether you actually said those words that were deceptive. Now, there's greater consequences often if we're deceiving others, right? Because then they believe our words and they may even act on those words on the basis of that. But again, in some texts, they say it includes believes you. But Geshe Sopa actually says it's not necessary. And I may have stated that wrong correctly. Geshe Sopa agrees with what is in our text by Venerable Rendala, that it's simply enough for someone to understand your lie, not to believe it. Like, again, we see in our world there are great consequences to people believing lies, like a particular person who has lied a number of times, and a lot of people in the country believe that person, right? And have caused a little bit of difficulty for others. So again, I don't know that I need to spell things out and clear. Lying is a very, very powerful way to cause a lot of problems in our world. Slander is not the term I prefer for number 5 here, the second of speech. I always like divisive speech. And that's because slander technically doesn't mean that. I mean, you can slander somebody and it does create some problems with them with others. But slander is a form of a lie. It is saying something that is not true about someone else with the intention of disrupting their lives and making it difficult for them in terms of their relationships. Divisive speech is broader in that it includes true speech. You can speak the truth to others with an intention to divide. You don't have to lie. If you hear something about somebody and then you pass it along to someone else because you don't want that person to befriend that person, then well, then you're doing this. You're creating a division with others. Okay, so let's look at what it says here. The object for divisive speech, again, we'll use that term throughout this, can be either persons in a state of mutual harmony or persons who are not. In other words, you can divide people who are currently getting along well, or you can divide people who already have some division going on in their lives. The conception is to recognize them as such. You have to actually, have the right people and understand the relationship correctly to some degree. The intent or the motive is a desire that they become alienated or that they not be reconciled. So that's kind of what's driving you to do it. You want to put a deeper wedge between those that are already divided or create a wedge between those who aren't. The mental affliction is as before. Again, we can see a variety of ways that you could engage in that. Maybe you have hatred towards that person, so you want them to, everyone to dislike them. So you start telling things to everyone else about them that causes more division for them. Or you could have attachment. Maybe, again, you're trying to divide two people so that you can have that one person in your life to yourself. With somebody who's dating somebody and you really like the person they're dating, so you start telling them negative things about that person so they'll break up with them so you can then be with that person. Right? You could lie or divide people out of attachment. So again, we can see that all the afflictions are relevant here as well. The finalization is the utterance of speech designed to cause alienation, followed by its having been understood. Again, this is what Geshe-Sopa says as well as our text, but there are some presentations, like in Pabanka Rinpoche's presentation that the FPMT has, where you actually do have to induce some hostility between those two parties, where there actually has to be something that is the product of all of that. I mean, those things kind of make sense when it comes to these actions of speech, that you have kind of another dimension to them. But I would always, in giving my advice on this, I would always want people to err on the side of the lesser action. I mean, that just saying these things is enough. It creates enough of a karmic potential, whether or not you divide people and they get hostile towards each other, or whether or not people believe your lie, or whatever the case might be. The next one we see for harsh speech, that some of the texts say that the person has to be hurt by what you say. Well, a lot of people aren't hurt by harsh words that we use, but that didn't stop the fact that we use those harsh words, right? I mean, some people just have, it's like water off a duck's back, they just don't care whether somebody has actually said something harsh to them. So again, those extra bits do make it more powerful in my mind, but I think you can have a complete action without them. Just by them being understood, just by the words being registered for the person who's on the receiving end of that particular type of speech. All right, let's go back to our text to the next one, which is our sixth. As I just mentioned, this is harsh speech. The object for harsh speech is sentient beings who have engendered hostile feelings. So it's somebody who you're annoyed at. Generally, we often are doing this out of anger or hatred energy, but it still could be out of attachment or ignorance. But the idea is someone has pushed your button, they've triggered you, you use harsh speech in response to that. All right, so that's the object, is that person who would be kind of the receiving, on the receiving end of that. Then it says the conception is to recognize them as such. The intent is a desire to utter harsh words. You really do want to say those things to put that person in their place or kind of harm them with your words. And the mental affliction is as before, any of the three. Or again, any of the other ones, jealousy, pride, what have you. The finalization is the utterance of harsh speech to those individuals. Again, as I said just a short while ago, some texts say, and they are hurt by those words. I would be careful, because I think Again, there are many people. You could get really angry and upset and say harsh words to a bodhisattva who's practicing patience all the time. I think you still have committed that action. Of course, and they say actually getting mad or angry at a bodhisattva has even greater power because of the power of the object. So I think we have to be careful. Whether or not the speech harms the other person is not the point. We have uttered it. The last one, idle speech, or what is often called meaningless speech, or sometimes meaningless chatter. This is when our speech loses its power to a great extent because we're not saying anything useful, beneficial. We're just, Venerable Rabina uses the term just rabbiting on, like the way, I guess, rabbits reproduce or whatever, jump around. I don't know how, we don't have that phrase in America so often, but rabbit on just means keep talking and saying things and just be delighted to spend all sorts of hours engaged in frivolous conversation. And we can even do it in smaller amounts. It doesn't have to be hours and hours. The object for idle speech is actually, again, going back to the speech like the first one was in the presentation. It's the words that you know are not true. Here, it's words that are devoid of purpose, topics that there's no real relevance to them. And this doesn't then require a person to be there. We can actually do this on our own. If you're like putzing around the house and you're just saying all kinds of things, even I've heard from some teachers that it would include things like singing along with music and stuff that doesn't really have any real purpose, like pop songs and whatever that are just about falling in love and getting, whatever, So the conception is to conceive of it, to say, oh yeah, this is what it is, and we know it for what it is. Again, some people might not think that some of the things they're saying are idle or meaningless. They might think they have great meaning to talk about sports or entertainment, for countless hours. But the idea is that we definitely are perceiving it as what it is. And the intent is the desire to talk of it, to spend those minutes, hours, whatever, engaged in that conversation. We can do this out of attachment, out of anger, out of ignorance. We can do it out of any delusion. And the finalization is to utter such speech. Again, that doesn't have to be heard by anybody. I want to talk about this just a little bit more because I think in our society, we certainly cannot live our lives with only having meaningful speech with everyone we meet, right? I think that people wouldn't know what to do with us if we were introduced to somebody and then we started immediately talking to them about the 10 non-virtues and how they, or whatever the case might be. But there is a necessity for engaging in some level of what might be kind of meaningless, just to know who people are and just find out what's going on in their lives. And even once we know them, that's a useful way to kind of keep those bonds there. But we have to always check our motivation. Is our motivation really just to say things that have no real intent? I think there can be great intention to using words that are somewhat meaningless to connect with others. The interfaith group that I work with in Santa Fe, we just had a little meeting when there was a new woman who was there. And so it was kind of interesting. What we decided to do was have everyone go around the table and say their story of kind of what brought them there. That might be seen as pretty meaningless in some circles of just, your life story in a nutshell, essentially. But it was really a wonderful way for her to feel a connection to the people that were there, that knew each other already, as well as for us to hear the stories of people that perhaps we didn't know quite all of the stories of, and to be able to understand, again, some ways that we can feel more connected to others. So don't think that this means that I can't utter a word unless it's chock full of Dharma, That's not how we can live our lives, I think. If you're living in a closed setting, like we were at the master's program where, it's mostly students that we're working with Dharma, well, then maybe there's a greater expectation for most of our conversations and discussion to be Dharma related. And certainly in a monastery, a nunnery where you have people who are all practicing the Dharma together, studying the Dharma together. But I think in general, most of us use some form of idle speech quite regularly as a way of extending our concern and connection to others. And that's not what this is about. This is about generally a form of speech that we know is a bit frivolous and ridiculous, and we just love to do it. We just really get into it. And I used to have conversations like that in college, right, where you'd stay up till all hours of the morning, just chit-chatting about all sorts of stuff, cultural stuff, books, whatever, I don't know. So we have to be careful with that. As I said, one of the biggest results of that type of speech is it disempowers our speech. If we're always saying stuff that's kind of meaningless, well, then when we do say something more meaningful, people don't take it quite so seriously, right? Because, oh, it's just Don rabbiting on about something else, forget it. Okay. All right, let's go to the three that pertain to the mind. Actually, before I do this, let me talk a little bit about these three with, I went ahead and put it up on the screen. These three with the mind, we'll see that kind of how they grow in terms of becoming a complete action is through the mental attention that we're paying to them. These three, by the way, the previous four were set out in terms of their order of severity. Generally, it's more serious to lie than to engage in divisive speech, than it is to engage in harsh speech, than it is to engage in idle talk. And the first three that we looked at last week, they're also set out in that order, killing being more serious than stealing, than sexual misconduct. These three are in the opposite order. The least of these three is covetousness. Covetousness is the word that we use. I mean, I remember hearing this word when I was a Catholic and we learned, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife or whatever, kind of patriarchal comment right there. But anyway, the idea is that covetousness means wanting something that someone else possesses, and it can even be a store or an online, retailer or whatever. It means something that you want that someone else possesses. Doesn't have to be something you're going to steal. It can be something that you actually buy. But again, we do need to buy necessities. So this isn't just about, you're not coveting food when you go to the store just to get your basic food that you need to keep your body alive. This is where we want wealth or property that is about this mind of acquisition, acquiring. So the object for covetousness is the wealth or property of another person. The conception is to recognize it as such, and the intent is to desire to possess that, to have that, what that person owns for yourself. The mental affliction is as before, though generally this one is quite related to attachment, right? It's that idea of I need to have that in my life to bring me happiness. And the finalization is the resolve to appropriate the wealth or property for oneself. So we see that with this one, it's not the actual acquisition of the property that matters. It's making the determination to get it, the resolve to get it. So with each of these, we see that it's kind of, it starts off with a small intent of like, that's really nice. Maybe I'll get that. And then it becomes, yeah, I'm really liking that. Let me look around a little bit, but I think I really want that. And then eventually we say, yeah, that's what I want. And even if at that point we find out that, we can't get it anymore or whatever the case might be, we have made the decision to acquire something. And that is strong enough to create a mental karma. Now, again, of these three types of karma, our bodily karma is generally much heavier than our verbal karma. Our verbal karma is much heavier than our mental karma. Because if something is purely a mental action, oftentimes it doesn't have an effect on anyone outside of that, because you can have covetousness again with regard to just acquiring objects, things, possessions, and never stealing them. You just pay your money for it or whatever, and you take it home and you've got another acquisition. That again is the kind of larger fulfillment of that mind of covetousness. But the idea is that if we only have the mind, if it's just mental, we're generally not harming other beings, even with the next one, which is harmful intent, kind of having a malicious mind. Yes, if we get that mind to that point where we want to harm somebody and we actually do, well, then obviously it becomes another level of action. It becomes an act of killing or an act of lying or divisive speech or whatever the case might be. So let's go back to look at the remaining two. So we see that malice or harmful intent is the next one and is more serious than covetousness. The object and conception for malice are the same as in the case of harsh speech, meaning someone who has harmed us, who we then are starting to think about in a negative way. The intent is to strike or otherwise inflict harm upon the individuals, and the mental affliction is as before. Generally, it's anger or hatred, what have you, that type of energy, but we can even have ignorance or attachment, other delusions present. And the finalization is once you start thinking about it, once you go, God, I can't believe that person said that to me. I really need to get back at them. And then eventually it works into, I'm definitely going to do something to harm them. I'm definitely going to do something to get back. that resolve to strike or otherwise injure them, verbally or physically, is the determination to do that is the culmination of this action. What follows would be a subsequent karma, a subsequent action based on our malice, based on our harmful intent. So this is what's dangerous about all three of these, is because they are mental karmas only, but they often act as the springboard for the physical action, verbal action, what have you. Number 10, false view. The term that we often see in our text is wrong view, false view. I mean, they mean kind of the same thing. But the way that this is described by Geshe Sopa is these are views that lead you away from positive actions and instead induce you to engage in negative actions. So they generally have to be with things that are denying something that exists that would generally be a good source of virtue for us. For example, right there in the text on the screen, the object for false view is, for example, the law of cause and effect, karma, the four truths, and other significations which are in fact true. The conception is to conceive of them as untrue. The intent is to adhere to that belief, right? It becomes stronger in your mind over time. But the initial intent is that I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe karma exists. This is how it starts. The mental affliction is as before, can be through any of those. And the finalization is resolving to blaspheme such truths, to say outright to others, whatever, make the determination in our own minds that without a doubt karma doesn't exist. Now, why is this the most serious? Because if we get to that point where we are actually denying the validity of cause and effect, then the door is wide open to engage in whatever actions you wish, right? And I'm not saying that that's going to necessarily always happen, because some people still might have some values that they hold to that keep them from killing other beings or what have you. But nonetheless, if we don't have a conviction in karma, then our actions don't have the consequences that we are talking about here. In other words, producing an entire rebirth, as well as all the various dimensions of that rebirth, where we're born, the types of resources we have access to, blah, 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 blah. All of that is determined by our karma. If we deny the existence of karma, then we don't pay attention to creating the causes for specific results. And we think that our actions don't necessarily have the consequences that the Buddha set out in terms of that. If we deny the Four Noble Truths, then we don't kind of subscribe to the whole concept of being able to attain liberation through the true path that teaches a way to attain a cessation of all of the causes of suffering in samsara, and so on. I mean, all of these things that the Buddha taught is true. They're there for a purpose. They're there to help us to evolve spiritually and to attain results of good rebirths, as well as liberation and enlightenment. Again, those two results of high status and definite goodness, or certain supreme beatitude, I think is the term being thrown around occasionally in this text. So again, all of these wrong views can get us in trouble. They can become a basis upon which we engage in other actions. But I would say there's probably sometimes when malice becomes a bit more stronger than a wrong view, depending upon what we have a wrong view. But that's true for any of these, even though they're set out in a particular order of some being worse than others, heavier than others. They can, depending upon other factors, change that order. Yeah, Eloise, you were going to ask a question.
Thinking about wrong view, if we're just going through our daily existence and not actually considering that the world around us doesn't exist in the way we think it exists, the way that it appears to exist to us. Is that wrong view?
I don't think so. Eloise is asking, I may have heard it online, but she's asking that if we talk about just the way that things appear to exist inherently, I'm assuming you're talking about the view of emptiness, which is said to be the most correct view. Is it a wrong view to just go about your life with no cognizance of that reality, that things appear to exist inherently and we subscribe to that? We don't question. I don't think we can call that a wrong view technically, because all beings have that ignorance. We even have that ignorance and don't have a cognizance of emptiness every moment of the day. I think it furthers our ignorance, but I wouldn't call it a wrong view, because it's not a conscious denial of that lack of inherent existence. If somebody were to study emptiness, for example, and understand the concept of it correctly, but come to the conclusion that it didn't exist, that would become a wrong view, I think, because that's somebody who is intentionally saying, this thing that the Buddha teaches about things being empty of inherent existence, I've looked into it and it's not true. It's whatever. But people who are just under the sway of their own ignorance and that false appearance, who are adhering to that, are not creating wrong view. They are furthering their ignorance without a doubt, because they aren't questioning the existence of things. Most people don't, right? Until I found Buddhism, I didn't question how things existed, right? So I don't think we're creating wrong view in that way, because again, it has to be something that we are intentionally denying. And you're not denying something in that moment. You are simply falling prey to that false appearance and the sway of your ignorance that keeps you buying into that false appearance. So, yeah, it's a good question. So again, these last three, we see that there's a bit of a mental continuum. And then when you actually, for example, that one, you get to the resolve to blaspheme such truths, how it might lead to you to go beyond that is to actually then say that to others. You go to the center here and you say, all this stuff about karma, it's a bunch of BS, right? You deny it to other people, right? That's kind of the next action. But again, it's a separate action from the thoughts. The thoughts is when we get to a place where we say, yeah, I'm absolutely convinced karma doesn't exist. That's why I think we have to be careful. There's a lot of people who certainly Buddhism has a lot to offer to different people. And I'm not denying the utility of so many of the Buddhist teachings that don't start talking about more dogmatic issues or philosophical issues, karma, rebirth, all these things. But we have to be real careful that we're not denying those things without really, taking the time to understand them. And a lot of people do want to practice Buddhism and not subscribe to all the philosophical stuff. They just want the nice packaging of like, how do I work with my mind a bit? How do I be a little more happy in this life and what have you? And there's nothing wrong with that at some level. But I think, again, if they actually take the time to explore these topics, they will find there's great utility to having those as part of our view of the world. The karma being operative, the four truths being there, the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha existing. All of these things add greater dimension to Buddhism. So again, I don't think there's anything wrong with people using Buddhism without all of those principles being adopted. They certainly shouldn't deny those principles, but nonetheless, there's a much richer practice if we actually investigate those and come to see their validity within the Buddhist worldview. That's just my opinion. Throwing that out there for you. But there's just a little bit left of the text on this section, and then we'll be moving on to the next section. That's on the next page. Let's go to that. For a more comprehensive explanation of the classification of these 10 paths, karmic paths, one should refer to such scriptures as the Nirnaya Samgraha. I don't know this scripture, but must be one of them in the kind of Vinaya lexicon or whatever that goes into those behaviors. I have not written more here for fear the discussion would become too lengthy. Thus, it should be understood that the 10 virtuous paths of action, which is what we're being told to adopt here by Nagarjuna, that is the ashul of the taking of lives, etc., are nothing but the very avoidance and renunciation of the 10 paths of non-virtuous karma just explained, even when their objects are near at hand. I would say particularly when their objects are near at hand. Again, we have the virtue of not killing when, for example, the mosquito lands on our hand in the summer and we consciously make the choice to maybe you even let that mosquito take a little bit of blood so that it can have dinner and go off and be happy. But even if you don't allow it to do that, at least you don't kill it. You might, blow it off your hand or, gently sweep it away or whatever. But this is when the virtue of not killing particularly comes into play. But as I've said a couple of times now, if you take the vow not to kill, then it's said that actually around the clock, even while you're sleeping, whatever you're doing, you're creating the virtue of not killing because of the power of that vow. So this is why vows are particularly useful for us to eventually feel some desire to take on that level of practice. And if we practice the vows ahead of time, then we have greater confidence that we can do that. So for now, try practicing, as we always try to do generally, avoiding these 10 non-virtues. They include 4 of the lay vows. The 5th one is something, again, we're going to see in the very next verse around intoxicants, things that distort our minds. This is kind of the way that we practice, is to actually become familiar with holding this conduct, and then we eventually feel very comfortable taking the actual vow. And that does talk a little bit about intoxicants in this last paragraph. Intoxicants are a cause for every sort of wrongdoing and are thus of great detriment. Their consumption being a misdemeanor by decree, or what we often call a non-virtue, is the term that we use, negativity by, the idea is that it's only by the vow. Drinking alcohol in and of itself isn't a non-virtue. You know, people drink alcohol. I mean, what follows from that is the point, can be non-virtuous, but drinking alcohol, oh, it's oh, I just had it pop through my head and now it disappeared again. By decree kind of works, but the idea is that it's stipulated. That's the word, a stipulated misdeed versus a natural misdeed. Killing is a natural misdeed. There are all instances of killing fall into that category. You might have a different motivation on rare occasions that might make killing less non-virtuous. But nonetheless, everything that is stipulated by as a misdeed by the Buddha is not naturally a misdeed. It becomes one by virtue of the Buddha saying you need to avoid this. So it's not included in the karmic paths. For these reasons, the eschewal of intoxicants is expressed in the context of pursuing a right livelihood. I did realize I do want to spend just a minute or two going through the results of these actions. Whoops, I went too far. There are, just as there are 4 branches, there are 4 results. The results of the 10 non-virtues are found in this little FPMT booklet on page 12. And we can define them as 3 different results, but one of them has 2 subcategories. So if we have a complete action, complete in the ways that we talked about for those 10, then we have the potential for all of these results to happen. The very first one is the main one we're talking about here in this practice, is trying to avoid a future rebirth that is unfavorable. It is a state that you will gain through that non-virtue that is a suffering state of a hell being, a preta, hungry ghost, or an animal rebirth. Again, we'll get more on those states of existence in this text later. That's the one thing that we're primarily focused on. You do not actually get a ripened result if the action is not complete. So if all 4 or 5 of those factors are not in place, then a ripened result cannot occur. The other ones can still occur, even if the action is not complete. They are divided into, the second one is divided into 2. A result similar to the cause in terms of our experiences, and then the result similar to the cause in terms of our actions. So it says there, once your karma to be born in the lower realms has been exhausted and you take rebirth in an upper realm, you will have experiences similar to your original actions. So what they say, for example, is if you engage in a lot of killing in this human life, well, then that will propel you into a lower rebirth. When you are reborn as a human, you will have a propensity or an experience that is similar to the harm you've caused to others. You will have a lack of vitality with the body you possess. You will have disease, illnesses, and so on. These are all the ripening of your having harmed others, or maybe even others start to harm your own body. That can be a product of that as well. One thing I want to say about both of these is they say when you're reborn as a human again, but we can have some of that ripen even in other existences. I mean, for example, if you look at why would a being be born as a carnivorous beast in this world, right? As a beast that requires the flesh of other animals in order to sustain its life. That's obviously a very strong karma of killing, right? Of harming other beings. So I don't want to say that these only ripen in human rebirths in the future, but we have to be concerned about, do I want to take those propensities into my human experiences and then have things that are similar that I did happen to me? Because the human rebirth, again, is a very precious one. but we obviously don't want the suffering in any existence. So nonetheless, I mean, I want to just clarify that I don't think that we can say that it's purely an experience in an upper rebirth, but rather it flavors whatever rebirth we end up taking. Whether again it's a propensity to kill or to have a lot of illness, to be preyed upon, all these things we see in the animal world, right? So it makes sense that there's a karma that was produced at one point, perhaps as an animal, though could very well be as a human being that has ripened into those experiences. So the other one I was kind of alluding to by saying you know having a propensity to kill, that's the action similar to the cause. That's once your karma to be born in the lower realms has been exhausted, and you take rebirth in the upper realm. Again, it can also be rebirth in lower realms where you would have those actions that are similar. You will have the instinctive tendency to commit the original action again and again. That's why, again, it's really, we gain a lot of power behind our actions by repeating them. That's why it's good to repeat virtuous actions and do them in this life. You know, to continually be giving, for example, generosity, to continually be engaging in other virtuous actions, because we gain strength by that. If we've done these things again repeatedly in this life, we will have a tendency to engage in them very easily in our future lives. So as I said, I think we can see both of those experiences and actions coming true for beings in the lower realms as well, particularly animals. Environmental results, this would be the fourth if we divide that second one into those two. When born, where they have to deal with the consequences of that environment, whether it be, again, a lot of cold, a lot of heat, various things. But it said that every one of these actions, and again, you can use the FPMT booklet to investigate them if you haven't had teachings on this, they ripen into their own specific type of environment that you were born into. Now, again, we change environments throughout our lives now, much more so than in the time of the Buddha. And most people who were born into India never probably went outside of India. Now we have people that travel all over the world and live all over the world. These things can change, but there's always a karma for the type of place in which you live and for you to see it in a particular way. And I love Venerable Ravina dearly, but when she lived here in New Mexico, she actually found New Mexico to be like an unattractive environment. She didn't find the beauty in it at all. Again, she was like, oh, people like this desert and it's awful. And I mean, this is just, again, a karmic appearance to her. And that's what karma is it gives us a particular appeal. Venerable Robina loves New York City, right? That's where she's living now. That's where she decided she wants to live, in the hustle and bustle and everything going on. And many of us would go, thank you very much. I'll visit, maybe go to a Broadway show or two, but that's it. You know, I don't really want to hang out in New York City, right? So again, we have different karma to see things in a different way. So these aren't hard and fast either. It's not like, you know, a desert environment is undesirable for everybody or for every animal for that matter. And it has a lot to do with our karmic appearances of the world around us. That's the environmental result. So again, we see that these last three, the two that are similar to the cause in terms of our experiences, in terms of our actions, and then the environmental result, these can happen even if the action isn't complete. So you have to be careful, meticulous in trying to avoid those actions, even starting if possible. The urge to lie, once we have that kind of starting in our minds, well, that's already a karma. It's not complete, but it is a karma. That's why also in our purification, I'm not going to talk about purification tonight, but know that as one of the cornerstones of the teachings on karma is to purify whatever negativities you've engaged in, thoughts that you've had, you know, actions you've done through your body and speech, whatever has happened, try to purify it, particularly at the end of each day. If we have a regular practice of tending to and tidying up our minds at the end of each day, well, then things don't take root and grow. Remember, karma is something that increases over time. If we plant the seed, it will start to grow and it will become an even greater result over time. Haven't gone into those four principles of karma. Maybe there'll be a time that's appropriate for me to go into those, but I just want to emphasize that again, there's a lot of dimensions to karma that you should study and investigate. I'm not going to go into all of those, But the main instruction is avoid these 10. Try to practice their opposites. And even going so far as to, as much as possible, engage in behaviors that are really directed towards the kind of contrary to those. For example, let's use killing. So again, it's nice to not kill, right? When you have that mosquito land on your hand and to kind of blow it away and go, and maybe even blow a little mantra on it so it's got some blessings, behind that. But it's even better, this is kind of the bodhisattva ethic to some degree, to protect life, to go out of your way to do things that help beings who are vulnerable, who do need your support. They often use the example of like if a flying insect has somehow landed in water, or even a crawling insect like an ant or something. This happens often in the summer where, we've watered the yard or something, there's puddles of water, and you see an ant kind of struggling out in the middle of it. I went there to get a little drink, but it's drowning. Take the time. I mean, it's a small action, right? Of just taking that insect out of the water, making sure it gets to live its life happily, the rest of its life. Protecting life is like another dimension of this. There's killing, not killing, protecting the lives of others goes even further. Give to agencies that protect the lives of others, sanctuaries where animals are cared for, or one of my favorites that I like to give to is, Doctors Without Borders, because of the good work they do in countries where medical aid is needed to help people who have been wounded and are dealing with disease, what have you. Again, there are many ways that we can kind of protect life and help the welfare of others. Those are very positive, virtuous actions that go beyond just refraining from killing. So know that there's like another level of ethical behavior that is kind of the bodhisattva ideal of trying to benefit wherever we can, trying to do whatever is necessary to kind of take it to that dimension. All right, so now let's go on to the 5b. We're only up to verse 5. We'll get there. I have confidence we'll get through the whole text as we go through the next several months. Let's go back to our text here. We have these 2 lines say, let me try to get that to scroll up. Abstain from intoxicants and likewise take delight in a virtuous livelihood. So we get kind of 2 topics that aren't generally talked about that extensively in our teachings, perhaps. Refraining from intoxicants is, but as it says here, because they bring about heedlessness, one should abstain from all forms of intoxicants, alcohol, any sort of drug substances that are mind altering, whether they are made from grain or from a mixture of different substances. Of course, now again, take it off screen for just a second. This is primarily because, again, it's not naturally non-virtuous. It's only a stipulated misdeed. And if we take the vow not to engage in any sort of alcohol or intoxicants, it's important that we uphold that. But the idea is that when you start taking substances that alter your mind, you have an ability, and if not an inclination, to engage in non-virtue. Geshe Sopa shares the story that I'm sure you've heard of the monk who is kind of on his way. Well, the way that he frames it, let me see if I can find the exact passage here where he talks about it. It's kind of, when my teacher first told it in Italy, it got a lot of laughs, but it's a sad story in some ways, based on all the non-virtue that this poor monk engages in on the basis of having gotten intoxicated. This is on page 47 at the bottom of the book with Geshe Sopa. And he says, at the time of the Buddha, a fully ordained monk was walking along a road. A woman came up to him carrying a full bottle of liquor and leading a goat. She said to the monk, "You must do one of these things, otherwise I will kill myself right in front of you." All right? You choose, either drink the alcohol, kill this goat for me, or have sex with me. Those are your choices. If you don't do one of them, then I will die. I will take my own life. Okay. So the monk had a big dilemma, he says. He didn't want to hurt the woman or the goat. If he killed the goat, it would be a very heavy negative karma. If he engaged in sex, he would lose his vow of celibacy and no longer be a monk. So he decided that his best choice was to drink the liquor. Actually, that was the worst choice. After he drank it, he lost control of his inhibitions and had sex with the woman. Then he was hungry and killed the goat for dinner. So I mean, it's a sad story in some ways, but we get a chuckle out of it because it's so absurd in some ways too, right? But these sorts of things happen, right? I mean, under the fluent influence of drugs and alcohol and, things that generally, it might not be a problem in small amounts, but in larger amounts or when our mental faculties are greatly disturbed, people kill other people. People do all sorts of things. People drive while they're drunk. I mean, this we know in our society, right? And end up taking the lives of others on occasion or their own precious lives, right? So again, it's not a good behavior to have. If you do engage in alcohol, other substances, it's just good to do it in moderation. And in fact, some people, when they give the vow, say that you're taking the vow not to get intoxicated. But that's a tough one because again, who's the judge of that? If we're just sitting there drinking, oh, I'm not intoxicated yet, and we keep drinking, thinking, oh, I'm not there yet. Well, when do you get there? I find myself, I mean, I took the vow in 1998. I'm not bragging or anything. I'm just giving some explanation around my own approach to this. I took the vow, I actually had taken it in 1996 with a lama when I took refuge, and he gave it as just don't get intoxicated. And so I continued to drink, but I was kind of trying to be more aware of, where things maybe go a little too far. But I finally decided in 1998, when His Holiness was offering the lay vows, to take them with the full intent of avoiding it. I mean, I don't miss it. I really don't miss it at all. I think some people probably do, but and again, if you're taking the vow, it's really important that you talk to the preceptor to get clear about what the vow is as they're giving it. Because some people may give it as, well, okay, if you want to take one glass of wine a day for your health, your heart health, or whatever, some doctors recommend that, right? Well, then that is okay within the context of taking the vow, but nothing else. Other preceptors may say, no, you can't do either of those, to drink recreationally or drink it as medicine. So you have to be really clear about what the vow is that you're taking. But once you take that vow, it is important that you do your best to uphold it. Okay. But even those who haven't taken the vow, just be careful because obviously this is what happens. We may not be killing goats, and having sex with people when we have a vow of celibacy, but it can cause all kinds of behavior, that is not so beneficial. Then in that paragraph, it says it is also added that one should further take delight in a virtuous livelihood. That should say in, I think. That is, partake of food, drink, and so forth in a way which neither harms nor brings about heedlessness in others. Again, we don't hear much on wrong livelihood in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, except in the context of not making offerings that have been acquired through wrong livelihood. And obviously, the main form of wrong livelihood is any form of deception or coercion, things where we've harmed others to get things that we then acquire. But I think it's in actually the book called 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness. I think that's the name of it, by Bhante Hennapola Gunaratana. I may be mispronouncing his name. He's a wonderful teacher in the Theravadan tradition. He talks about 3 criteria. I'm going to introduce you to these really briefly that you can use to investigate whether your own livelihood has some context of being wrong, of having something that is injurious to yourself or to others. The very first one is questioning whether by nature what you are engaged in is harmful. In other words, if you were working for Los Alamos Labs and designing weaponry that would be used, nuclear weapons, whatever. Well, obviously weapons are not something that is beneficial, and they're harmful. They have that connotation. Weapons, what are some of the, if you're taking the lives of animals, if you're a butcher, somebody in the factory where that is occurring, what have you. If you have to lie for your work, some people are even rewarded on how well they're lying to people, right? It does happen that businesses engage in this type of activity. So if it is by nature something that requires you to engage in non-virtue or be a part of creating something that is harmful in our world, then it's something you probably should take a look at again. Now, if you're reluctant in engaging in it and you're wanting to change the culture of that company or what have you, then maybe you can actually do that by staying there. I'm not saying that these are an indication that you have to leave. It's just acknowledging that because you're about something that is not so beneficial to beings, it's already got some negative karma to it. Yeah, Sarah, I think you wanted to
What's
ask
the first one I didn't hear?
this first question.
Yeah.
Is my job by nature harmful to others? Again, by nature, if we are doing our job and occasionally, like say you're somebody who drives a vehicle for people to deliver medical supplies. That's a wonderful thing to do, right? But in the summer, you probably are hitting countless insects on your windshield. And there's something that happens. That's not by nature harmful because your work is not really about killing insects. Your work is to deliver medical supplies, for example. Number two, the question is, does it cause me to break my vows or commitments? Does it cause me to have some uh, kind of fault within my own behavior that I'm trying to uphold because of what I have to do? And I always think back on Venerable Amy Miller when she was a layperson working in I think it was Washington, D.C. This is in the video for the Karma module. I think she talks about it there, that she was actually having to lie, having to continually tell mistruths, and she was rewarded for that. They would actually say, wow, that was really great that you lied to that person and got them to believe blah, 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 and everything. I mean, that does happen, that there are businesses that are actually trying to create deceit with other people so that they can take advantage of them to some degree. Weird, right? I wouldn't want to work in such an environment. If you have the vow not to lie, or you feel really strongly about being committed to this path of practicing avoiding the 10 non-virtues, then any job that requires you to do that, to lie, would be something you wouldn't want to be engaged in, right? All right. And then the third question we should ask ourselves is, this one's quite interesting. Are there other factors that disturb my mind within my work, that make it difficult for my mind to kind of feel at peace and settled? Now, that may be more subjective, right? Because say you work in a company that's about something very good and you don't have to engage in any non-virtue in order to work there, any breaking of vows or anything, but it's a really fast-paced environment that requires you to constantly be doing this and that, and maybe work really late hours and get up and lose your sleep and never have time to practice. I mean, that may be something where you go, okay, my job isn't harmful in all these other ways, but I can't keep doing this way because it's causing my mind to be too disturbed. When I finally sit down to meditate at the end of the day, I can't even focus on my breath for 5 seconds, right? It's a very subjective criterion, but nonetheless, one that we can actually make use of, because if that is the case, we don't want to be caught up in something where our mind is constantly disturbed. Any questions on those three in particular while I'm talking about them? A wonderful explanation of them in that book I mentioned, 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness, or 8, yeah, I think that's the title. It's published by Wisdom, I think, yeah. Okay, let's go back to the text then and continue on. We got another little bit just related to kind of segueing into the next section, the next verse. The next verse is stated in order to illustrate that one who maintains the paths of virtuous karma should practice the giving of gifts according to their means. All right. This is another emphasis on generosity. This is the second time we've encountered generosity, right? Because it was one of the 6 recollections or remembrances. Remembrance of generosity and morality. Those 2 were in there. We're going to have a verse on generosity and then another verse on morality. So again, these are 2 of the main practices that we're really trying to uphold as lay practitioners in particular, but also, of course, they're important for the ordained where they're applicable. Nagarjuna's text says, recognizing wealth to be ephemeral and insubstantial, exert yourself properly in liberal acts. They use this word liberality. We saw it earlier for generosity. Very antiquated word, but nonetheless, we'll just talk about it as generosity. Towards bhikshus, brahmins, the poor, and friends. For the future, there's no better friend than generosity, than liberality. Again, remember that the effects of being generous so that we have resources in the future. So this is why it's emphasized as an important act to engage in. So it says there in the commentary by Venerable Randawa, material wealth such as food and clothing is called ephemeral because it is unstable, right? It comes and goes, we can't rely upon it. And even when we have wealth, well, then, the ability for it to purchase what we want might change, right? With inflation or all the other things that go on, where suddenly that wealth is not as valuable as we thought it was. It's insubstantial, he says, because it provides no real or lasting satisfaction, right? The wealth that we have, if you're the richest person on the planet, you still will have to die and leave all of that behind, right? Doesn't have any real substantiality to it in terms of being able to use it for more lasting results. Now, again, we can use it in the way that's being described here for generosity. That's how ideally anyone who's practicing a dharmic path should look at resources as, yes, this gives me what I need to be comfortable in this life, to have the strength and what have you, ideal conditions to practice. But it's primarily because I can use that money, resources, what have you, to benefit others, to increase my own acts of generosity, especially on the bodhisattva path. It's quite important. Remember, we're going to see generosity again shortly when we talk about the 6 perfections. Okay, continuing, it says here, realizing this to be the nature of material wealth, one should perform acts of generosity properly, that is, respectfully, so as to derive genuine value from such wealth. This is where I just want to emphasize it. We have to be kind of wise in our generosity too. It's important not to just be frivolous and throwing money all over the place, but to really try to direct it where it's needed, or where we think again that it will have the best impact. We're going to see that to some degree in regard to these various objects that we are talking about that are important in terms of our spiritual development. That's the next paragraph. But, I don't want to discourage people from any form of generosity, because I think it is important, but we also do have to be sometimes careful that we're not giving inappropriate resources, something that is not really going to be useful for that person and could even be harmful, right? And there are certainly many people talk about this, when you're being generous, giving resources to those who are unhoused in our society, who don't have the resources that are required. Be somewhat careful in terms of whether we're giving them resources that end up being used in inappropriate ways. And we don't have a lot of control over it. If somebody really needs money and we feel kindness towards them and want to share that with them, we can't dictate how they spend that money, and they may spend that money on things that are not so beneficial for them. But regardless, if we are called upon to make a choice, we should always be much clearer. Like if somebody, obviously doesn't need more alcohol and they are asking you to buy them more alcohol in the store rather than give them money, we might be very careful about that. We might say, well, no, I don't know that that's the best thing for you. Would you like a meal? Is there something I could do for you otherwise? Always try to be generous. And if we can't physically be generous because we don't have the resources, at least have good thoughts towards that person. Well, I can't give you anything right now, but I really do hope you find what you need, have those thoughts towards them, what have you. So we can be generous with the actual resources, but we can even be generous with our thoughts of loving kindness towards other beings. Remember, that is one of the types of generosity that is discussed in the Mahayana. It's called generosity of love. So here we talk about these different beings that are mentioned here. With a desire to either to honor or assist them, one should make gifts to bhikshus, that includes bhikshunis, which would be the fully ordained nuns, monks and nuns, and Brahmins. And by Brahmins here, we mean people who are dedicated to practicing a more spiritual life, beings like bodhisattvas, and those beings who are higher on the path are all included in that. Anyone who is engaged in that, they constitute, as it says here, the field of virtue, or sometimes this is referred to as the field of excellence. They're a powerful object for us because of the qualities that they possess. So when we give things to them, we are acknowledging that they have those great qualities, and we want to assist them on their path of virtue. Okay, so that's why they're mentioned particularly, because of that first of the 3 fields. The second field is called here the field of misery. I don't really like this word so much. It's the field of suffering, the field where we see a greater amount of suffering in others, those who are destitute and sick, as it says here, those who are vulnerable and challenged, those beings who we really want to make sure we interrupt their suffering as best as we can through giving them resources, right? Or giving them our time, helping them, protecting them, what have you, whatever we can do for them. That's the greater part of the world, right? The destitute, sick, those who are suffering in some way. And then lastly, to such friends as preachers of the Dharma and parents who constitute the field of assistance. This is often called the field of benefit. Parents are often delineated as one of the very powerful objects for us. Well, why is that? Because they benefited us. Remember Venerable Rabina was asked once by somebody who said, well, my parents, they gave me away right after I was born. My mother gave birth to me and then I never saw them again. They didn't really play any role in my welfare. And Venerable Rabina said, well, at least your mother didn't abort you, dear. Kind of looking at the side that even if somebody simply is carrying you to term, that's a benefit. That's not, you didn't die in the womb or, being extracted from the womb, being killed in the womb, whatever. All right. So again, those who have benefited us, who we feel very strongly towards, again, gurus, lamas, what have you, who fall into this category might also be those in the field of virtue or excellence because of their great qualities. But those who we have a particularly close connection with, who are benefiting us through giving us the Dharma, through giving us other things that really help us in our well-being, we should recognize the role that they play. So again, these are teachings that are often set out in the teachings on karma around different objects of our actions. Some objects are more powerful than others. In fact, it's said that the guru, the lama, or that person who you have a strong relationship with in terms of them guiding you on your path, they're the highest object for you. They're higher than the Buddhas, higher than monks, nuns, whoever. If they're lay, ordained, doesn't matter. That person who is playing that role of being a spiritual guide to you, who you've made that commitment towards, not just anybody who's teaching the Dharma, that person for whom you have a disciple relationship with, and they are your guru. They are very powerful to you, the most powerful object. So try to practice acts that benefit them, that are helping them in whatever way. All right. Let's go back to the text. Getting close to the end of time here. Let's see. I think we can get through this and maybe then at least start the next one. Since in the future great results will come about from such generosity, it is stated that there is no more helpful friend than your own generosity for future lives. Now, that's not why we should be doing it. We should be thinking about ourselves totally. Well, I want to give all this money so I can have a lot of money in my next life, because karma increases. And so everything I give, like, $1 becomes $100 in my next life, whatever. That shouldn't be our motivation. We should recognize that this is something that we want to be attentive to so we can have the resources we need for future generosity and for our well-being so we can continue to practice the path. Think always in terms of those sorts of results. Don't think greedily or selfishly. And then it says here, a person who breaks the leg of morality, though gaining wealth from some generosity, will fall into the inferior states. And since the root generating the wealth becomes exhausted, he shall henceforth acquire no more. So this is from the Madhyamakavatara, the text we studied in Italy, the supplement to the Middle Way by Chandrakirti. And the idea is that it says that the person who breaks the leg of morality, if we actually don't accompany our practice of generosity with morality, well, then we are going to perhaps have our generosity ripen into some unfortunate state. And then it becomes exhausted there and we won't acquire anymore because it's very hard to acquire merit through generosity in the lower realms. Let's use the example of like our pets, right? Our pets are a product of their negative karma. Their negative karma have created the rebirth as an animal. So in terms of that ripened result, they have become an animal. However, they are having a ripening of unbelievable karma, most of our pets, right? Because they're living in our posh homes with good food and with, comfortable temperatures and being taken care of and constantly being attended to and having access to medical care and blah, 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 right? So this verse is pointing out that, generosity can ripen for you, but be careful to not avoid your practice of morality. Because without morality, generosity could ripen into one of those experiences where we are born as, what is it? Leona Helmsley had a dog that she left millions of dollars to. She died, and the dog was like the richest dog in the world. But the dog's only going to live so long, right? And then the resources are gone. So what is that? That dog had that karma to get all that incredible wealth, but couldn't use it for anything beyond snacks and food, right? Nice new dog bed or 10 dog beds or whatever. The dog couldn't even decide how to spend the money, my gosh. Okay, so since the fruit of generosity detached from morality is enjoyed as a being of an inferior state, no further liberality is developed for the benefit of future lives, and the condition of wealth itself will therefore come to an end. So again, Leona Helmsley's dog couldn't even say, oh, by the way, give some of this money away to them, or I'd like some money to go to this SPCA or whatever, couldn't even do that, right? As a dog, right? Okay. In that same scripture, the Madhyamaka, it's further stated, when virtues are developed in the field of morality, the enjoyment of their fruit will not be interrupted. Because again, if we do these practices while we have a higher rebirth and we continue to create the causes for high rebirths, we will continue to practice that way. This is the karma of having actions similar to the cause, that we actually have a result of being more generous in the future. And we want to have that generosity ripen in lives where we can do that, where we get the resources and can be generous to others. So, as it says there, then, generosity combined with morality will result in great wealth enjoyed in a life as a deity or human. Again, ideally a human. The Dharma does exist again in these realms of the deities, the gods and demigods, but it's ideal to be born as a human with everything that this human existence has. And since in that state one practices still more liberality, supported by morality, the enjoyment of ample fruits in subsequent lives will be unending. So then it says, and just introduce this verse and then we'll stop for tonight. Therefore, so that such merit as generosity will not go to waste, the following verse is stated as an injunction to observe morality. And I'll just read it and then we'll do the commentary next week. You should practice a morality unbroken, not debased, undefiled, untainted, uncorrupted. Morality was declared the foundation for all virtue, just as the earth is for all things moving and unmoving. By the way, you'll recall that we had the recollection or the remembrance of morality as well. I mentioned that earlier in the 6 remembrances. And it said, we had an allusion to this, alluding to that particular passage, saying that it would be explained and discussed when we get to that. So that's coming up next week when we go to what Venerable Rendawa explains in regard to these various ways of describing morality, being unbroken, undefiled, uncorrupted, and so on. They all have a kind of unique meaning on the way that our morality should be practiced. So we made a few pages. That's not too bad. Any questions on what we've talked about tonight? Okay, so again, a lot of the emphasis, particularly in this first part of the text, is on morality and on engaging in virtuous action. This is one of the things that we do have to remind ourselves that we have to be really careful about. And as long as we have this life and we have the ability to choose, to say, I'm going to choose to use my life, my resources, whatever I have in particular ways that are virtuous. We should be strengthening that every day. And of course, engaging in the good morality that comes along with that, avoiding these 10 non-virtues. Now, if there are some of these that we can't yet overcome, we have to do our best to try to work in that direction. Again, when we do the purification, one of the things we do is the power of resolve, of trying to refrain from that action again in the future. Be kind to yourself. Don't say, I'm going to never do that again if it's something you're going to do the very next day, or later that night, whatever. Then give yourself that space. But we should always be striving to move our actions as much as possible in that direction. maybe that's enough. We can do the prayers then for tonight and conclude. And then next week, again, I'll carry on with verse 7 and the commentary to that. So, Mary, thank you for putting the prayers on, and Jana again will lead us all in those prayers.
General dedication prayer. Due to the
Merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
Long life prayers for our teachers, beginning with His Holiness Dalai Lama. The wish
Granting wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
And for Osalhita Lamiyeshi's reincarnation, Venerable
One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long.
And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche,
Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losam, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings. Through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Now let's recite the prayer list that we have here. Maybe before they do this, I'll just mention that Osalhita is actually on his way to California, maybe even there already. He's going there for the 40th anniversary of the passing of Lama Yeshe, happened in 1984. So that's happening at Vajrapani, Land of Medicine Buddha. They're doing a lot of events. And so we can think about there and what's all happening there and the wonderful things that Osalhita is up to in this world and his presence. So we have the dedication list somewhere here. Yes. Few names.
For those suffering obstacles, we have Gina, Robin C., Yvonne, and Joaquin. Those suffering from illness, Jane, Rolf, Dutter, Joanne, Rosemary, Elena, Ken, Clara, Yvonne, Don, John, and Jana. And those who have died, I, Doubler, John Alcy, the man who jumped, Bill Woodall, and Bonnie B.
Okay. And if there are any other additional names, either here in the Gompa or in the Zoom space, then please come forward with that. I might dedicate for Amata, who is dealing with some illness. She's here with us tonight, actually. She may be not wanting to dedicate herself, but she's dealing with a flu of some sort. And so for her, as well as for all of her beautiful animals at the sheep sanctuary, especially little Leela, the little lamb that she adopted just a short while ago that she rescued. So anyway, making strong prayers for their welfare. Any others? Okay. So again, let's send this positive energy out to, oh, we do have an addition here.
There's the
Oh,
lamb.
there's a lamb. Oh, there's Leela, little Leela. Oh, she's so precious. Thank you, Amata, for sharing little Leela. Yeah, Amata runs the sheep sanctuary down in the La Cienega area, just outside of Santa Fe there, and comes to some of the events at Tukta Norbuleng at times.
Sheep that are going to be put down, or?
Well, it's often sheep that are, well, like with the lambs, it's sheep that are not lambs that are not feeding. And so there's a risk of them dying. And the one that she got here, Leela, was actually in really bad shape by the time Amata got to her. That people said they were taking better care of her than they were. But anyway, she also has rescued lambs from Los Golondrina, I think that's the name of it. Anyway, it's the little kind of old New Mexican farm type of thing that's right there outside of Santa Fe. It's a tourist place where people come and kind of see what old Santa Fe was like. And the problem is that a lot of the older sheep, they don't want to keep them around because they're not as attractive for the guests coming. And so they would normally just get rid of them. And so Amata adopts them. And I think she has something like 95, 96 animals. Not all sheep, but other animals as well, turkeys, all sorts of wonderful creatures. I don't know if you want to share any more, Amate, probably not with your flu going on, but it's a wonderful, wonderful, very compassionate being.
Thank you.
You're too kind, Amate.
I
Okay.
don't know if you can see how engaged she is with these. This is her first time playing. I don't know if it's showing on the video, but she's making the lights change herself.
Yeah, when Amata got her, she was just this like flabby, I don't know how to describe it. She just had no energy at all. Yeah, I mean, she had.
She was about an hour away from death. She was what would be classified as unresponsive. Yeah.
Mhm. And so Amata just nursed her back to health and sacrificed her own health, I think, to do that. Certainly sacrificed her sleep.
Yes, indeed. Still am.
Yeah. All right. Blessings to you, Amata, and to all your wonderful creatures there. Okay, so we send this positive energy out and to all the beings that we've mentioned, and also to all beings, so that all beings may be free from suffering and find the happiness, the peerless happiness that they seek. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Amata, for sharing all of your wonderful pictures of Leela at play. So, all right, everyone, be well. I'll see you again next week.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all online.